الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. أيتها السيدات والسادة، أهلا بكم في المنتدى العالمي ال13 للمالية الإسلامية الذي ينظمه المعهد الإسلامي للبحوث والتدريب. بداية أرجو من معالي الدكتور محمد نوري جويني التكرم بالتفضل للمنصة لاستقبال الضيوف. من معالي الدكتور بندر حجار رئيس مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية بالتفضل للمنصة. I kindly request Mr. Michael Bennett to come to the stage, please. معالي الدكتور محمد رضا شلغوم رئيس المالية للجمهورية التونسية فليتفضل. تفضلوا أخوة. قبل البداية خير ما نبدأ به تلاوة عطرة للذكر الحكيم بتلاوة الأخ الدكتور رحال بالعادل فليتفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعاً متصدعاً من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. صدق الله العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. شكرا جزيلا، جزاك الله خير دكتور رحال. الآن أدعو معالي الدكتور محمد جويني للتفضل بإلقاء كلمة الافتتاح لهذا المنتدى فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Islamic Development Bank Group, I would like to express my deep and profound gratitude to the government of Tunisia for the efforts made to support the IDB Group activities and hosting the 13th Global Forum on Islamic Finance. I take this opportunity to welcome all our guests who have traveled from faraway places to attend this event. This forum has remained a catalyst for initiating a debate on development challenges faced by the IDB group member countries. This year is not an exception. The forum focuses on the role of the Islamic finance in mobilizing long-term financing for development. The timing of this forum is significant indeed, because of the huge challenges for financing the ambitious sustainable development goals. The IDB believes that Islamic economics and finance have certain inbuilt features that can contribute to improving and solving the funding issues related to the long-term investment needed for achieving SDGs. I hope that this forum will address some of these challenges, particularly those related to the very important priorities for our member countries, and also to explore new directions in promoting the flow of investments to these countries. I express my sincere appreciations for all those who have directly or indirectly helped in organizing the wonderful event, especially Zaytuna University, our local partner in Tunisia. I also hope that the cooperation between IDB, IRTI, and Zaytuna University would continue for the promotion of Islamic finance. Thank you, and welcome again to this forum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
شكرا جزيلا معالي الدكتور محمد جويني لإعطائنا هذه النبذة المختصرة حول محتوى المنتدى وأهمية التمويل الإسلامي في إيجاد التمويل الطويل الأجل للبنية التحتية. الآن أدعو معالي الدكتور بندر حجار رئيس مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية لإلقاء كلمته، فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. معالي الدكتور محمد رضا شلغوم وزير المالية جمهورية تونسية، السيد الدكتور مايكل بينت مدير إدارة المشتقات والتمويل المنظم في البنك الدولي، السيد البروفيسور ثورستون باك من مدرسة كاس لإدارة الأعمال في لندن، السيد الدكتور عشرة حسين المحافظ السابق للبنك المركزي الباكستاني، معالي الدكتور خالد شريف نائب رئيس البنك الأفريقي للتنمية، الضيوف الكرام، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. من دواعي سروري أن أرحب بكم في حفل افتتاح المنتدى العالمي الثالث عشر للتمويل الإسلامي، وأتوجه بالشكر والامتنان لحكومة الجمهورية التونسية لما لمسناه من حفاوة الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة والرغبة الجادة في إنجاح فعاليات الاجتماع الثالث والأربعون لمجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، والذي اختار تونس لاجتماعاته لهذا العام. ويطيب لي أن ألقي بعض الضوء على متطلبات التمويل طويل الأجل لتحقيق خطة التنمية العالمية الطموحة التي تشهدها جميعا اليوم. فوفقا لتقديرات الأمم المتحدة، ثمة فجوة تبلغ 2.5 تريليون دولار أمريكي من احتياجات الاستثمارات السنوية لتلبية أهداف التنمية المستدامة. وعلاوة على ضخامة حجم الأموال المطلوبة لتمويل التنمية المستدامة، فإن الإشكال الرئيس يكمن في الحاجة إلى توفر هذه الأموال على المدى الطويل. والمثير للاهتمام أنه ليس هناك نقص في الأموال، وإنما وفقاً لتقديرات البنك الدولي يتم استثمار أكثر من 10 تريليونات دولار في سندات بأسعار فائدة سلبية، كما يتم استثمار 24.4 تريليون دولار في أوراق مالية حكومية ذات عائد منخفض، في حين أن هناك 8 تريليون دولار أمريكي من السيولة النقدية التي تنتظر فرص استثمارية. فالإشكال لا يكمن في نقص الأموال بقدر ما هو تخصيص الأموال للاستثمارات طويلة الأجل، ومن ثم يتضح أن هناك حاجة ماسة لطرق مبتكرة لمعالجة تخصيص المنخفض للأموال في الاستثمارات طويلة الأجل بغية تلبية طموحات خطة التنمية المستدامة العالمية. وفي هذا الصدد تم إقرار عدة مبادرات وسياسات لإشراك المنظمات الدولية كصندوق النقد الدولي ومنظمة التعاون الاقتصادي والتنمية ومجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية للتصدي للآثار الضارة المحتملة والناتجة عن الفترات الممتدة من نقص التمويل في الاستثمارات طويلة الأجل. وعلى الرغم من وجود اختلافات طفيفة في الرأي فيما يتعلق بتفاصيل المقترحات، فإن ثمة اتفاق عام حول تشخيص الإشكال يتمثل في غياب عنصر تقاسم المخاطر والمشاركة في رأس المال لمعالجة الفجوة. التمويل الإسلامي الذي تمارسه المؤسسات المالية الإسلامية منذ عدة قرون، والذي يعتمد على مبدأ تقاسم المخاطر ومبدأ التمويل المدعوم بالأصول، من الممكن أن يكون هو الحل. فطبيعة التمويل الإسلامي في قاعدة تقاسم المخاطر والأرباح تعزز موائمة مصالح جميع الأطراف وتضمن التوزيع العادل للدخل، وبالتالي تشجع الاستثمارات لفترات طويلة. وعلى الرغم من الرؤية المثالية لصناعة الخدمات المالية الإسلامية، إلا أنها لا تزال في مرحلة بدائية، أو بيد أنها سجلت نمواً مضطرداً خلال العقدين الماضيين تجاوز فيها أصولها 2 تريليون دولار، وما زال هذا النمو مستمر، كما أنها تطورت من حيث السعة والعمق بمزيد المؤسسات والمنتجات المبتكرة واتساع التغطية الجغرافية. ولكي يكون التمويل الإسلامي فعال في معالجة فجوة التمويل طويل الأجل، فالتقرير العالمي للتمويل الإسلامي الذي ندشنه اليوم يؤكد بشدة على الحاجة إلى تعزيز النظام المالي من خلال تطوير البيئات القانونية والإدارية والتنظيمية الداعمة لمبدأ تقاسم المخاطر. وللقطاع الخاص وأسواق رأس المال دور محوري في التعبئة طويلة الأجل من خلال إشراك المستثمرين على المدى الطويل، بما في ذلك صناديق التقاعد وصناديق الثروات السيادية وشركات إدارة الأصول وأصحاب رؤوس الأموال الاستثمارية وشركات الأسهم الخاصة، بينما يطلع التمويل الإسلامي بدور تحفيزي لسد الفجوة التمويلية في الاستثمارات طويلة الأجل من خلال تحسين السياسات وتمكين البيئة التحتية المالية وتنويع المنتجات المبتكرة. ولا أريد أن أستبق نتائج وملخص التقرير الذي سيتم نشره في وقت قريب، لكني أضمن للقارئ تميز التقرير بالتغطية الشاملة والتحليل المتعمق. السيدات والسادة، إن البنك الإسلامي للتنمية ومنذ أكثر من 44 عاماً يمارس التمويل الإسلامي ويسعى إلى تعزيز التنمية الاقتصادية من خلال عملياته. ومن أجل تحقيق التنمية المستدامة على المدى الطويل، شرع البنك في طرح مبادرة جديدة يتصدر من خلالها موقعاً جديداً ضمن المشهد المتغير لتمويل التنمية في أعقاب جدول الأعمال العالمي 2030 للتنمية المستدامة. وفي إطار المبادرة الجديدة تلتزم مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية بإقامة شراكات مع كل من القطاعين العام والخاص، مع التأكيد على تطوير الأسواق المالية والبنية التحتية المالية وتوسيع دور القطاع الخاص. وسينصب التركيز على ما يتطلبه نظام تقاسم المخاطر وتعزيز الحوكمة لتوفير المراقبة الفعالة وتخفيف المخاطر. وفي هذا السياق تقدم مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية الدعم لتطوير القطاعات المالية المعززة للتمويل الإسلامي. سيدات والسادة، في الختام أود أن أغتنم هذه الفرصة لأهنئ وأشكر فريق المشروع من البنك الإسلامي للتنمية والبنك الدولي على جهودهم الدؤوبة لإنجاز هذا المشروع بالغ الأهمية، متطلعاً لرؤية المزيد من التقارير المشتركة في المستقبل القريب إن شاء الله. شكراً لكم وبالله التوفيق، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا جزيلا معالي رئيس البنك على هذه الكلمة القيمة التي ألقت الضوء على أهمية إيجاد الآليات الكفيلة باستقطاب التمويل المتوفر والتنويه بدور مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية في هذا الإطار. قبل الانتقال إلى المتحدث الموالي أود التنويه بأن الترجمة متوفرة بكل اللغات العربية والفرنسية والإنجليزية. Now I kindly request Dr. Michael Bennett to give his speech on behalf of the World Bank.
Thank you. Good morning. It's my great pleasure to be able to represent the World Bank at this global forum here in beautiful Tunis. And I'd like to thank the Islamic Development Bank for the very kind invitation. My name is Michael Bennett, and I'm the head of derivatives and structured finance at the World Bank. To give you a sense of the breadth of the World Bank's treasury activities, during our last fiscal year, we issued 55 billion of bonds. We managed approximately 170 billion of assets, and we entered into over 160 billion notional amount of derivatives. Virtually all of this treasury activity was executed in conventional form, and therefore it's very clear and will come as no surprise to anyone in this room that the World Bank is fundamentally a conventional financial institution. Having said that, we believe the goals, principles, and structures that underlie Islamic finance are fundamentally in line with our own objectives as an international development institution. Specifically, we see three clear areas of commonality between the World Bank's development mandate and Islamic finance. First, an emphasis on financial inclusion. Second, a concern with the morality of an investment and not just its risk-adjusted returns. And third, a focus on long-term investment as opposed to short-term trading. It is this last point, the focus on long-term investment, that's the subject of today's forum. Long-term investment is absolutely critical to build a more sustainable global economy. If you consider, for example, the 17 areas addressed by the Sustainable Development Goals agreed at the United Nations in 2015, all of them require long-term investment. Achieving these goals, which cover areas like infrastructure, health, education, and climate change, will require trillions of dollars of spending annually, and it simply does not make sense to finance on a rolling short-term basis investments that have long-dated return periods. And in the area of sustainable development, return periods can be truly very long. While the return period on critical infrastructure can be measured in years, the return period from educating or immunizing a child or from empowering a girl can only be measured in decades. As everyone in this room knows, Islamic finance provides us with a multiplicity of real asset-based structures that facilitate long-term investment. But equally importantly, Islamic finance presents us with a robust ethical framework that encourages investors to focus on the long term through, for example, its discouragement of speculation and its requirement that finance be linked to the real economy. In other words, Islamic finance provides us both with a product toolkit and a mindset conducive to long-term investment. With that, I will close by thanking again the Islamic Development Bank and also the authors of the report on long-term finance we'll be launching today. And I wish you all a very productive and successful meetings here in Tunisia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Bennett, for this speech highlighting the role of Islamic finance in achieving even the goals of the World Bank. الآن أدعو معالي الدكتور محمد رضا شلغوم وزير المالية للحكومة التونسية فليتفضل.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي الدكتور بندر الحجار رئيس مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، معالي الدكتور محمد النور الجويني، معالي الدكتور ميشيل بينات من البنك الدولي، معالي السيدات والسادة الحضور، حضرات الإخوة ضيوف تونس الكرام وضيوف المنتدى. إنه لمن دواعي الاعتزاز أن أشارككم اليوم فعاليات افتتاح المنتدى الثالث عشر للمالية الإسلامية، وأن أعبر لكم عن تقديرنا لاختيار البنك الإسلامي للتنمية تونس لعقد اجتماعاته، وهذا دليل جديد على عراقة العلاقات وحسن التعاون والثقة المتبادلة. وعسى أن يوفقنا الله في أن نرد التحية بمثلها، وأن تكون تونس لكم ضيوفنا الكرام أرضاً يستطاب فيها اللقاء وتكلل فيها أعمالكم بالنجاح والتوفيق. حضرات السيدات والسادة، أن موضوع تقاسم المخاطر لتمويل الاستثمارات طويلة الأجل الذي اخترتموه كعنوان لهذا المنتدى يتناول أحد أهم أولويات هذه المرحلة، فنحن نسعى جميعاً لتحقيق تنمية اقتصادية واجتماعية مستدامة ودامجة لمختلف الفئات والجهات، وهذه التحديات تتطلب وضع برامج للإصلاح ومعالجة مواقع الضعف في الأداء والتكيف مع البيئة الاقتصادية المتغيرة، ويستوجب تمويل البرامج المذكورة توفير موارد تختلف مخاطرها وصيغ تعبئتها وفقاً لطبيعة الاستثمارات والمشاريع التي ستخصص لتنفيذها. والحاجيات في هذا المجال كبيرة، ليس فقط في منطقتنا ولكن أكاد أجزم في مختلف مناطق العالم. فبالرغم من تجند مختلف الدول الأعضاء في الأمم المتحدة سواء في إطار الأهداف الإنمائية للألفية التي اعتمدت سنة 2000 أو في إطار خطة التنمية المستدامة لسنة 2030 التي تم اعتمادها سنة 2016، فإننا نسجل اليوم الحاجة الملحة لإيجاد الصيغ الملائمة لتعبئة الموارد الضرورية لتنفيذ الاستثمارات التي تمكن من إنجاز البنى التحتية الضرورية لفك عزلة المناطق البعيدة ولتعبئة الموارد المائية واستصلاح الأراضي الزراعية بما يمكن من توفير الغذاء ومقاومة الفقر الذي يجب أن تبقى نسبه مهما انخفضت تثير قلقنا جميعا وتستوجب منا التدخل. وفي هذا المجال لابد أن نستحضر أنه حسب منظمة الأغذية والزراعة الأمم المتحدة لا يزال أكثر من 750 مليون نسمة يعيش في العالم في حالة فقر مدقع، أكثر من 3/4 يعيشوا في الأرياف. كما تعتبر من أولويات في المرحلة الحالية توفير الموارد الملائمة التي ستمكن من تسريع نسق البنية التحتية في مختلف القطاعات لأهمية ذلك في دفع النمو وفي تسريعه. وفي هذا المجال مثلا في مجال النقل مثلا نقص البنية التحتية في القطاع يزيد في كلفة النقل في إفريقيا ب 40% بالنسبة للبلدان اللي عندها منفذ على البحر، وب 60% بالنسبة للبلدان الأخرى. وهذه الكلفة يمكن باستثمارات بسيطة في مجال البنية التحتية التقليص فيها، وبالتالي دعم قدرة هذه البلدان، دعم قدرتها التنافسية. وفي تونس عندنا هذه الإشكالية، وعندنا استثمارات مبرمجة في هذا المجال. كذلك تسريع إنجاز الاستثمارات في البنية التحتية في مجالات حماية البيئة وتوفير الخدمات الصحية. اليوم 1 على 4 بالنسبة لوفيات الأطفال اللي أقل من 5 سنوات يتوفى لأن ما ثماش استثمارات في المجاري الصحية، لأن ما ثماش استثمارات لحمايتهم من التلوث البيئي. وهذه من المسائل اللي نعتبرها كذلك ذات أولوية، إيصال البرامج الصحة الأساسية في المجال. وفي الحقيقة عندنا برامج مع البنك الإسلامي في التنمية في هذا المجال، ونتقدم للسيد رئيس البنك بالشكر على ما يقدمه البنك بالنسبة لهذا القطاع، بالإضافة إلى التعليم والتكوين ومواكبة الحاجيات المتزايدة لكسب المهارات في التكنولوجيات الحديثة وغيرها من المجالات. وتقدر الحاجيات لتمويل البنية التحتية حسب تقرير البنك الدولي ب 90 تريليون دولار خلال الفترة الممتدة من 2016 إلى 2030، وهو ما يستدعي النظر في سبل الاستفادة من مختلف مصادر التمويل المتاحة وتدعيم التعاون المالي مع المؤسسات المالية والدولية والإقليمية. وبلداننا تواجه جزء من هذه التحديات، وهو ما يستوجب تنفيذ الإصلاحات الضرورية من جهة، وتوفير مزيد من الموارد لتمويل متطلبات التحول الاقتصادي من جهة أخرى، وخاصة الموارد طويلة المدى. فالدول المصدرة للنفط في حاجة إلى تنفيذ استثمارات هامة تمكنها من تنويع القاعدة الاقتصادية ودعم دور القطاع الخاص وتحويل الثروات الناضبة إلى مكان من النمو في أنشطة واعدة ومتنوعة. أما الدول التي مرت بفترة انتقال سياسي على غرار تونس فهي في حاجة إلى ترسيخ دعائم الاستقرار، وذلك بتسريع نسق الإصلاحات الضرورية والبحث عن سبل جديدة لمواجهة ضعف الاستثمار العمومي وارتفاع كلفة تعبئة موارد إضافية من السوق المالية العالمية، بما يدعم الانتعاش الاقتصادي ويساهم في التقليص من نسب البطالة. حضرات السيدات والسادة، يطرح تمويل الاستثمارات طويلة المدى إشكاليات باعتبار الصعوبات اللي تعيشها بلداننا من حيث توازناتها المالية، وتعذر تغطية مخاطر هذه الاستثمارات من قبل آليات التمويل التقليدية، بالإضافة إلى ضعف القدرات الذاتية في بعض الحالات على تصور ودراسة المشاريع وتقديمها بالصيغ الملائمة لمؤسسات التمويل، وكذلك للأسف عدم النجاعة وسوء الحوكمة في التنفيذ من حيث الكلفة والآجال في حالات أخرى. كل ذلك يجعل من البحث عن صيغ تمويل بديلة ترتكز على الشراكة في تصور المشاريع ودراستها وتنفيذها وتقاسم مخاطرها ضرورة في هذه المرحلة. ذلك أن المسألة غير مرتبطة بتوفر الموارد، فكما ذكر السيد رئيس البنك وورد بالوثيقة التقديمية للمنتدى، السيولة متوفرة بالسوق المالية العالمية، حيث يتم استثمار أكثر من 10 تريليون دولار. واستسمحكم الدكتور لإعادة هذه الأرقام في السندات ذات معدلات فائدة سلبية، و24 تريليون دولار في الأوراق المالية الحكومية ذات العائدات المالية المنخفضة، و8 تريليون دولار تنتظر فرص استثمار أفضل. ومن هذا المنطلق أعتقد أن الحوارات التي ستدور في إطار أشغال هذا المنتدى ستكون بناءة في اتجاه معالجة الاختلال الحالي في منظومات التمويل، بتوفير حلول ترتكز على تطوير المنتجات المالية وآليات تغطية المخاطر الملائمة مع المحافظة على صلابة منظومات التمويل بدراسة المخاطر والتحوط لها، ووضع قواعد التصرف الحذر وتعزيز قدرات السلطات الرقابية في المجال. وفي هذا الإطار يمكن مزيد التعمق في دور المؤسسات المالية الدولية والإقليمية في توفير آليات التمويل الملائم لحاجيات الاستثمار طويل المدى، ونحيي المبادرة اللي ما بين البنك الدولي والبنك الإسلامي للتنمية في هذا المجال، ونتطلع للنتائج التي ستفضي إليها. كما يمكن التعمق في إيجاد الصيغ الملائمة لتطوير التمويل المباشر، سواء من خلال دعم الشراكة بين القطاعين العام والخاص، أو من خلال تطوير أدوات السوق المالية ومداخلة المدير العام لبورصة تونس ستقدم لكم من المقترحات وما تم التقدم فيه، وكذلك الإخفاقات أو المسائل التي نأمل أن نتقدم فيها بنسق أفضل. وتطرح آلية التمويل الإسلامي التي سيتم تناوله بالدرس خلال هذا المنتدى أحدى الحلول الممكنة بالنظر لقيامها على مبدأ المشاركة في الأرباح والخسائر وللمرونة التي تتميز بها ونسبة التطور التي تعرفها والمقدرة ب 9.4% خلال الفترة 2016 و2022. ولا تخفى عليكم في هذا المجال الأهمية المتزايدة التي توليها الدول والبنوك والمؤسسات المالية ومؤسسات القطاع الخاص لصناعة الصكوك، فقد بلغ حجم الإصدارات المتراكمة للصكوك في العالم 447 مليار دينار سنة 2017 مع حجم إصدارات ب 98 مليار دولار خلال السنة المعنية. وهذا ما يبرز تلائم هذه الآلية مع تمويل مشاريع البنية التحتية والمشاريع الكبرى بالإضافة إلى ما توفره من موائمة بين مصادر الأموال واستخداماتها بما يسهم في تقليل مخاطر عدم التماثل بين أجال الموارد واستخدامها. حضرات السيدات والسادة، وعين منها بأهمية دفع الاستثمار لرفع نسق النمو وأحداث مواطن الشغل خاصة بالمناطق الداخلية، حرصت الحكومة التونسية على إنجاح وتنظيم مؤتمر دولي للاستثمار تمكننا من خلاله من تعبئة موارد من قبل الدول الشقيقة والصديقة وكذلك من قبل مؤسسات التمويل الدولية والإقليمية، ونحرص اليوم على تسريع نسق تنفيذ هذه المشاريع.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
شكرا جزيلا معالي الرئيس. بعد أن يغادرنا أصحاب المعالي أطلب منكم البقاء معنا، هناك حلقة نقاش حول التمويل الإسلامي وتمويل البنية التحتية برئاسة معالي الدكتور زمير إقبال نائب الرئيس المالية للبنك الإسلامي للتنمية. شكرا جزيلا. Yes. Yeah. كلمة الرئيس. هذه. I kindly request you to stay here, so we have a panel discussion. I kindly request Dr. Zamir Iqbal to come to the stage, please. Mr. Torsten Beck, please. دكتور خالد شريف، السيد بلال سحنون، والدكتور وليد عبد الوهاب، فليتفضل.
We're short of chairs. Sorry? No, I think one seat is missing. They'll put it on. Just put it. You know, I can stand. Look, I can stand. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion. Before I start, I really want to congratulate Islamic Development Bank and the World Bank for producing a very comprehensive global report on Islamic finance, dealing with the role of Islamic finance in financing long-term investments. And I hope you do get a chance to go through the overview, and I am waiting for the full report to be released. Now, we are very honored to have a very distinguished panel who covers many different areas of expertise. We are lucky to have 3 representatives from 3 different MDBs. So in addition to that, we have one of the prominent academia, and then in addition to that, we have one practitioner who leads the local stock market. So I think you can see that this is a very, I would consider, a powerful panel with so much wealth of expertise and knowledge, and I think we can get very full benefit from them. You know, starting with, I would start with Professor Thorsten Beck, because of, before we can get into more practical and policy level questions, I think we need to get a perspective from academia. And given that Professor Thorsten is an authority on the financial sector and on the financial institution and banking systems, I think there's no one else better to start. So, Professor Thorsten Beck, welcome. I would like to first ask you that you have seen that after the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, the financial markets went through a massive kind of a crisis. What do you see that because of the crisis, what lessons been learned from there, how the financial markets are changing with respect to the long-term finance? Are people become more open to long-term finance, or they are shying away from long-term finance? It has become more challenging. Could you please share your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the very kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here at this, the launch of this excellent report. On the development of long-term finance over the last decade or so, I think 2008 has been quite a marking point for 2 reasons. Number one, of course, for the crisis itself, which in banking, especially in conventional banking, has led to a certain process of deleveraging and de-risking, maybe, as many would say, for the better. Because there were certainly too many risks and too many fragility in the system. We also know, of course, that Islamic banking, for example, has held up much better during the crisis than conventional banking, partly related to the capital buffers. A second big trend that we've been seeing, and that's more, I would say, over the last 5 years, and certainly a process that has only just started, is, of course, the regulatory reforms, the post-crisis regulatory reforms. And again, this is most prominent in banking, although we've seen some similar trends in the insurance sector with Solvency II. But in banking, of course, we've seen it with Basel III. I think we can't really come to a conclusive judgment on the effect of Basel III as such on lending yet. But I think, at least on the aggregate level, but I think the first hunches, the first conclusions point to a change in the composition of lending. And it's certainly away from long-term finance, unfortunately, away from riskier parts of the loan portfolio, which actually is not, might partly be related to the capital requirements, to the higher capital requirements, but mainly also to a large extent to the newly introduced liquidity requirements, such as the net stable funding ratio, for example, but also concentration limits, for example. So I think there is maybe an unfortunate trend away from long-term finance, especially when it comes to infrastructure finance. However, also because of certain additional restrictions for the role of banks in capital market development, for example, as market makers in many developing and emerging markets. So that's certainly something to watch. Having said this, I think it also puts a stronger focus on non-bank financial institutions and on capital markets, which actually by the nature should be much more prominent in providing long-term finance. Which brings me to my final point, which I want to really stress, is that beyond the trends we've been observing, the post-crisis trends in business models, in the structure of banking, and in the regulatory reform, I think we have to look, continue to look at the structural impediments. And of course, we'd like, I mean, I guess also because of the brief of the ISDB, we'd like to focus more on emerging and developing countries, but of course some of these are also very much present in the advanced country, including in the regions where I come from, the European Union. And that is to say that it's heavily bank-based systems where these elements that are better, these segments that are better placed to do long-term finance, to intermediate long-term resources such as capital markets, institutional investors, both public and private, are simply not as prevalent. And I think the report, as I saw in the executive summary, points to some very important structural constraints, such as the institutional deficiencies which exist still across large parts of the world, but also the socio-political and economic uncertainty, which just increases the premium on long-term finance to a just prohibitively high level. But a third point I want to make, there is also demand-side constraint, I would argue. There is something, and I like the Spanish word for actually the best, which is called cortoplacismo, which is kind of a very short-term view in terms of investment, in terms of commitments made by entrepreneurs, which just kind of makes them reluctant to actually go for long-term funding sources. So I think that's another issue very much to be looked at. Thank you. You have to start speaking and then it comes.
Well, thank you so much. I think just as a very prominent academia, you have touched upon several factors in a very kind of concise way. I think let's move on to you mentioned about the challenges faced by the capital markets. So I think I would like to move to Mr. Michael Bennett, who mentioned earlier that as a World Bank Treasury, they issue about 55 billion each year. So I would like to hear from Michael, Michael, what do you see in the capital markets? Do you see any appetite for long term, or the investors are coming towards the short term? And how do you see that the capital markets versus access through the banking, which one has a better kind of a source of long-term financing? What are your views?
I think clearly if you're looking at finance long-term, and let's say particularly for infrastructure, a critical component is engaging capital markets investors. So then the question is, why aren't capital markets investors already there in that asset class? And I think it goes a lot to whether that asset class is producing what capital markets investors see as sufficient and appropriate risk-adjusted returns. It's very difficult, I think, in the infrastructure space because of the political realities for a government, let's say, supporting a new energy generation facility or a toll road, to charge sufficient tolls and fees to its population necessarily to create the kind of revenues that capital markets investors are looking for. And I think that's become a big problem, the lack of essentially investable projects, because the revenues coming from those projects won't necessarily be sufficient to attract the interest of capital markets investors. So then the question becomes, what can we do about that? And I think at the World Bank and the multilateral development bank community generally, we see the need for some enhancements, credit mitigation provided by our sector to essentially reduce the risk to a point where the revenues produced by that project will be sufficient to attract investors. And what we're very much focused on at the World Bank is the fact that that support that we can provide this sector is, of course, a very limited and precious resource. Even all the MDB capital combined is very small compared to the long-term infrastructure needs that exist in all of our member countries.
Thank you, Michael. So we have heard from the World Bank. Now let's move to Dr. Khalid Sharif. He has actually very rich experience of both the World Bank and now at the African Development Bank. So I would like to ask Dr. Khalid that, you know, Africa is one of the regions where the infrastructure or long-term finance need is the most. So could you please share with us the experience of African Development Bank in this respect and what initiatives you're doing to raise long-term funding? I understand that you have a presentation. Would you like to us to put that presentation up?
If it's helpful, and I can walk through it also.
Sure, please.
If I can just have someone guide me through the slides. Well, just very quickly, if we can go to slide 1, and I think Michael had been discussing this. Thank you very much. And I think Michael had alluded to this earlier. So in 2015, the global community adopted 17 sustainable development goals to support global development aspirations through 2030. So we have an objective through 2030, all of us, all of the IFIs and the MDBs combined, to actually implement the SDGs. We all look at it from a different perspective. In the African Development Bank, we look at it from the perspective of what we call the high fives, which are effectively synonymous to the SDGs. So investment needs for the SDGs are estimated at about $5 to $7 trillion annually, and $4 trillion of that is needed in developing countries. So just imagine what that means in terms of what's required in terms of achieving the SDGs. $4 trillion per year going into development activities across the developing world. The good news is that the estimated funding gap for developing countries is equal to about 1% of global capital markets, just 1%, 3% of global GDP, but definitely a more challenging number when you look at that amount being about 14% of global annual savings. So this is our challenge, and specifically to the question that was asked, for Africa's challenge in particular, the main mandate of the African Development Bank, and now obviously in very strong partnership with the World Bank and of course our partners, the Islamic Development Bank, how big is Africa's infrastructure deficit as an offshoot to the question that I was asked? Well, the funding gap in Africa is substantial. We're looking at about 90 billion annually, according to Ernst & Young, about 93 billion according to the African Development Bank, and about 100 billion annually according to the World Bank. And I guess Deloitte made it simple, and they basically said any tens of billions of a number will work, but it is the reality of what we're looking at. Between 90 to 100 billion is what's needed annually to be able to cover Africa's infrastructure deficit. So what we do know is government and traditional donors can meet at best about 50% of those requirements. That's at best, 50% of those requirements. So where would the rest come from if we're actually going to try and find a way to meet that infrastructure deficit? So the resources in the global financial system, just very quickly, there's about $120 trillion that are managed by institutional investors and commercial banks globally. There are about $433 billion in remittances, and this is basically money that different nationals hold working abroad who basically can move that money in and out. For Africa, it's about estimated to be about 300 billion across the board. We also have about 7.2 trillion in sovereign wealth fund resources, and about 3.3 billion in private participation in infrastructure activities that make up the bulk of what we know as the field of public-private partnerships. But specifically for sovereign wealth funds, 7.2 trillion, this could be one source of financing that we can start looking at in terms of trying to deal with this financing gap to get us to where we need to be on the SDGs and infrastructure financing for Africa more generally. So the potential new funding sources that go beyond the traditional areas where we work would be effectively two. Those sovereign wealth funds that I talked about, and pension funds specifically that can also be tapped into to support development activities. And across the board, if we look at those types of sovereign wealth funds, the Africa institutional investors that exist that have access to that kind of financing, the sovereign wealth funds, the kind of money that exists that insurance companies have, that pension funds have, how do we de-risk bankable projects consistent with achieving the SDGs and bring in that level of finance? And how do we do that in a way, especially since our discussion today is about Islamic financing, to also facilitate the implementation of the SDGs? So effectively, the 5 principles of the prohibition of riba, the prohibition of speculation, the prohibition of financing illicit sectors, the profit and loss sharing principles in Islamic finance, and the asset backing principles in Islamic finance, all of that is consistent with how we can also direct money from sovereign wealth funds, especially coming from Islamic nations, to finance the gap that exists currently. And so just to begin to close very quickly, Islamic finance in Africa, Islamic finance is present in more than 21 countries. There are more than 50 Islamic finance institutions across Africa, and you find them concentrated in countries like Kenya, Morocco, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, Sudan, and Uganda, and all of them have established legal frameworks for Islamic finance. So our challenge is huge in terms of basically meeting the challenges of development, development just generally, meeting the challenges of development countries more specifically, and they're huger still in meeting the development challenges for Africa. And we hope that in partnership with our other IFIs, the World Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, and the partnership we're pursuing as the African Development Bank with the Islamic Development Bank, to play as much of a role as we possibly can in promoting sovereign investments towards achieving the SDGs, but with an understanding that in the end, it is going to be the non-sovereign investments that are going to make the difference. It is going to be making sure that sovereign wealth funds become very active on the African continent, that pension funds, especially African pension funds, instead of investing abroad, invest on the continent, and that together we can make a difference to help Africa more generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. Now we have heard from the World Bank and we heard from African Development Bank. Let's move to our host, Islamic Development Bank, and we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Wahid Abdul Wahab. He has been involved with infrastructure finance for quite a long time. So you can think that, he has got his hands dirty with this thing. So I would like to ask him, Dr. Waleed, that based on your experience, you have dealt with the infrastructure finance, you've dealt with the long-term finance, you've dealt with Islamic finance. What are the key challenges you have faced in this journey? And you have heard from Michael and you have heard from Dr. Khalid. Does IDB have faced a similar challenges? What is your experience as a practitioner?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brother Samir. Well, since you called me a host, so let me take just a minute to welcome everyone to the annual meeting of the IDB and to Tunis and to this forum. As Zamir mentioned, I have been directing the work of infrastructure in the bank for the last 10, 15 years, but recently I took another role, which is looking after the country programs in all our member countries. So I now have a slightly different perspective on the development needs of the countries. But this reminds me of the role of IDB compared to World Bank, for example, or African Development Bank, my colleagues on the panel, but all the MDBs, there are now 10 of them. I think there is a global forum now that collects all of us every year. We meet in the margins of the spring meeting and the annual meeting of the World Banks. And we started to compare notes, and we discovered that we are not very different from each other. Of course, we are the only Islamic multilateral development bank, and that brings opportunities and challenges, which I'll try to touch on very shortly. But just to give you an idea, I mean, all MDBs, they do not focus equally on infrastructure. I mean, when we had to force ourselves to disclose numbers, every MDB had to report, and this was initially triggered by the G20 agenda, because they have a track focusing on growth and development. And we discovered that MDBs vary. We, for example, IDB, we do about 95%. Now, of course, this you have to go into the definition of what infrastructure means and so on. But in general, in the broad definition common to all MDBs, for example, the World Bank does about 55–60%, Asian Development Bank about 70%, so is African Development Bank. You have, of course, the AIIB, the new bank, which is an entirely infrastructure bank. But what we noticed that across all these MDBs, we have one common challenge, which is access or availability of long-term finance. And I think from the, just to answer your question directly, I fully agree with the presentation of both World Bank and African Development Bank, is that there is this gap between the assets and liabilities. It's very simple. Sometimes we get bogged down by the trillions and the billions that we hear about and how small the challenge seems. And you even hear this in the opening of our president this morning. He says the issue is not about financing, or it's not about capital. It's the mismatch sometimes that we all face. So I don't think there is anything inherent in Islamic finance that make IDB face different sets of challenges. The fundamentals are the same. The fundamentals, for example, on the demand side, if you have a project that is not bankable because the infrastructure service is not priced correctly, Islamic finance is not going to solve that. So the issue of reform and fixing the service delivery imperative in the countries, charging the right price for this infrastructure services is fundamental, whether this is done through users, directly by the citizens, or through taxation or different combination of those. So I think IDB, when we hear these numbers, we say, okay, well, it's not an issue. It's just a matter of issuing sukuk or doing this or that. But the reality that we face is not very different from the realities of conventional MDBs, which is really the mismatch between the huge funds that exist in the market and the nature of and the long-term needs of the infrastructure projects. If you take just the institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, which have long-term liabilities and they're looking for investment, you get very easily a fact that these investors are not investing in emerging countries, for example, in infrastructure, which are long-term assets. For various reasons, some I mentioned already, and some are to do with the broad country perceived risk. And MDBs, I think we have a role to play in addressing those investment climate, for example, in the countries. We have to go out of our comfort zone and help the countries improve the investment climate to attract investors, those institutional investors. For example, creating asset class that makes it more easy for institutional investors to understand and invest in, because they're not going to come and invest with you on an individual project. They don't understand the risk environment. They don't see a risk-adjusted reward that is in line with their investment policy. And I think this is a common or collective responsibility. There is, as I said, a global infrastructure forum, for example, among all MDBs. They meet regularly. But there is now more recognition, especially after the climate change, the forest displacement, the fragility that is spreading in most of our, some of the regions that we're covering, is putting a call on all stakeholders to work collectively. It's not anymore an issue of borrower and lender relationship that is driving the scene. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's move on to our next panelist, Dr. Bilal Shahounon. You are the CEO of the local stock market. Now, you have heard about the issue of mobilizing funds is always a problem. What is your experience of mobilizing market-based funds to the stock market to mobilize long-term financing? What is your, have you experienced such thing? Have you done experiment in Tunis? Or what is your, kind of share with your experience with us?
Thank you, Dr. Zamir. We all agree that capital markets provide several services and benefits to corporations and governments. For corporations, by deciding to make transition from private ownership to go public, raising capital by IPOs, to develop their business through access to a huge universe of investors, local or foreign investors, and facilitate growth. And the advantage of the capital market for corporations are how to reduce debt by increasing the capital, and it's not completely free because we need to give dividends. And the second advantage is how to share risks, and we will get a better governance and transparency in those listed companies. Of course, there is some disadvantages: the risk of capital dilution and disclosure rules. Maybe that's why financing long-term rate for corporate sector, equity and bonds is very low in our region, less than 5% in Africa, when it is about 20% in emerging market, 40% in Europe, and about 80% in the USA. On the other hand, for governments, access to the capital markets fund can help to finance a state-owned company. It's a huge problem here in Tunisia. To raise money for infrastructure or other major project. We are now in Tunisia. We are trying to get our first issuing sukuk issuing, and last year we had signed an MOU with Nasdaq Dubai to share with Nasdaq Dubai the issuing of sukuk in our both stock exchanges. We are facing three major problems for issuing sukuks in Tunisia. The first one is the political parties, how to convince politics to get sukuks. It's very, very difficult I think it's not difficult, it's a lack of understanding how sukuk works. The second one is how to identify and get the best assets to put on sukuks. And the third one is the cost of sukuks. We think always that sukuks are cost a little bit more than conventional finance. In Tunisia, we have another particularity. Our economy is based on SMEs. We think that SMEs represent about 97% of our total companies. And SMEs are facing problems of lack of guarantee. They are undercapitalized, and they don't get an easy access to the financing, to be financed by banks. And now we are trying to build a program for 120 companies, SMEs, with a UK grant of £2.65 to coach and to prepare those 120 SMEs to go to the capital market to diversify their source of financement. And I think we have to work on those two fields: SMEs, state-owned companies, it's another subject, and to get sukuk for our government to get more resources.
You are very close to issuing the sukuk and using sukuk to mobilize funds. And I think, given my own experience, it's not easy for a country to issue the first sukuk. As you said, there are many different challenges, including the cost cost and the legal structure and all these things, but I'm sure that you'll overcome these challenges. I think the first round of questions have set the stage for looking forward, that how do we meet these challenges. Let me come back to Professor Thorsten and ask him, I don't know whether you got a chance to look at the report, but I think the report has identified that Islamic finance, which is basically a risk-sharing finance, is, I really sometimes do not like to use too much of Islamic finance as a term, because I think I call it more of a structured finance. At the end of the day, it's a different, another type of the structured finance. So, Professor Thorsten, in your experience, what do you think that is the risk-sharing finance? Do you think the market is ready for risk-sharing instruments? And what do you see that, what kind of a reaction market may come in not only risk-sharing, but it's also the asset-based finance. And I have heard about the talks of project-based bonds in Europe and so much. How do you see the market evolving, or what is the response from the market on this risk-sharing finance like Islamic finance?
Paul, I think you could see long-term finance always as some kind of risk-sharing between lender and borrower, because there are, of course, risks on both sides. There's the interest rate risk, there's the real income risk, and so on. But of course, we know that, especially in more volatile environments, pure fixed debt repayment structures are much more difficult to agree on, because the two parties just diverge too much. So then the long-term risk premium just becomes prohibitively high. So, and I think here it is where the risk-sharing element is a very critical one. And I think the market, or let's say the financial system as such, is definitely ready for that. And I think we can see it everywhere, not just in Islamic finance or in participation finance. I mean, for example, earlier it was mentioned that there might be actually not a lack of debt, but there might be too much debt in many SMEs. So there's a more lack of equity. So that, which then calls, of course, for maybe more equity finance. But then the question is, how can small enterprises really tap the capital market? Certainly not the public capital markets, but they might also be too small for private equity funds, which then gets us to this kind of mezzanine structures, where you have a mixed form of debt finance or second-tier equity finance, some mixed package, which ultimately points towards a kind of a risk sharing arrangement, which I think you will see more and more coming up. So I think this dichotomy between equity and debt, conventional Islamic finance, I think it's not as much to it as we sometimes like to make out of it. But I'd like to point to just a second component of risk sharing, which also kind of points to some previous points made, and that's the risk sharing between private and public sector. And I think especially in infrastructure, we've seen it more and more, where the private sector in many emerging, developing markets is simply not ready to take on commitments for more than, let's say, 5 or 7 years because of the risk profile of the country, the socio-political uncertainty, and so on. And so here, having a structure of public sector guarantees, maybe international MDB guarantees, and private sector funding, I think, can be very helpful. And I think there are more and more examples around the world. So one example I just looked at is the FDN in Colombia, an infrastructure development bank, which puts some money up there, some public money, but tries to crowd in the private sector through certain guarantee structure. So I think that kind of risk sharing will be as important as is the risk sharing within the private sector.
Maybe one follow-up question on this thing. I have also heard this ideas of even, I think IMF has floated the idea of issuing the GDP-linked bonds. And, Professor Schiller has talked about macro markets. What do you see that this kind of GDP-linked or risk-sharing, or even, I understand World Bank has worked on some impact bond linked to SDGs. Where do you see the scope of these capital market-based instruments linked with the development of emerging markets? Sure.
where basically everybody has realized that the Greek debt is not sustainable and that there might be a move necessary to these kind of GDP-based sovereign bonds. As a general idea, I definitely would support this. I think it is a very positive idea in terms of risk sharing. I guess as always, the devil is in the detail. How do you measure GDP? And I mean, again, coming back to Greece, that was a problem from the very beginning. Unfortunately. So there is definitely something to be said about, but there is something also to be said about how to construct the index, which of course is with any like indexed based security is always a challenge. And I think maybe the countries that might need the most, they have made maybe also the most problem in terms of to construct such an index such as the GDP to base these bond payments on.
Okay, I think I'm going back to Michael. Michael, I know that World Bank and you are involved with it. You had issued FM bonds, FM Sukuk, to raise funds for the immunization of children. And I think, could you share with us what was your experience with those Sukuk, and do you think the similar Sukuk could be structured for infrastructure finance in your member countries?
Yeah, thanks, Samir. As some of you may remember, in 2014, the World Bank arranged what was called a vaccine sukuk. We did a 500 million sukuk where the purpose was to raise funds to immunize children in the poorest countries of the world, and the repayment flows on that sukuk actually come from donor governments. This was probably the first international sukuk that had a charitable purpose behind it. And we uncovered, I think, significant demand among the Islamic investor base for products like that. Products that provide not only Sharia compliant format, but also where the use of proceeds is something sustainable and ethical, and that means immunizing children. The issue of scalability with something like that is that Sukuk was explicitly backed by governments. Again, the reflows on that Sukuk came from 9 member governments, most particularly the UK and France. So again, it was what I was calling earlier the precious resource of government or multilateral support can only go so far. So obviously, I think the future requires probably more targeted use of those kinds of funds. And in the case of that Sukuk, it was 100% supported by governments. So we need really to look at ways in which that support can be brought down, less capital intensive for governments and NDBs, and really share risk with the private sector. I do think when we're talking about risk sharing, I'll just make maybe 2 other points. I mean, one is, of course, risk should be shared equitably, but not equally. I think my mother, for instance, lives on a pension, and I would not want her pension fund to be invested entirely in equity-type instruments or long-dated infrastructure projects with full risk sharing, because that would be a very risky portfolio for my mother to have to live on. So I think when we talk about risk sharing, it's not that every investor in the world should take full equity participation, and that's the future, because there definitely is a need for less risky assets for certain kinds of investors. And finally, I just want to pick up on the point that Professor Beck was making on risk sharing between public and private. And I think another element of that is in terms of what the public sector, what the governments can do in creating the right regulatory environment for long-term investment. Because what we see in a lot of our member governments at the World Bank is that the regulations and even legal cultures in those places are not conducive to providing comfort to investors in areas like protection of creditors' rights or speed and efficiency of local court systems. So I think that should also be brought into this discussion and debate in terms of what the public sector can do to promote more private investment is on the regulatory side. I think that's vitally important.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, maybe just to kind of, I think you made a very valid point about giving example of your mother's pension. Of course, I think maybe just a clarity, when we talk about risk sharing, does not necessarily mean that it's equity, because that's a very misconception. You know, the risk sharing also include all the asset-based finance. And as you know, Islamic finance has leasing, ijara, and istisna, and these kind of things, which has a risk sharing, but not necessarily the equity kind of component. It is based on the asset. So at the end of the day, the idea is to have a skin in the game. So, you know, I hope kind of that thing is clarified among our audience. Now, I think one theme is coming up very commonly, that the need to have a public and private partnership. So I'll come to Dr. Khalid, asking that, you know, what do you see that within African Development Bank, do you see that forging this partnership can solve some of these problems? And what is African Development Bank's position on bringing the stakeholders to have a skin in the game?
Well, let me just say very clearly that the African Development Bank, the countries that represent the African Development Bank group, represent a variety of challenges unparalleled anywhere else in the continent. Obviously, having spent the last 30 years of my life in development, working on development in Eastern Europe or in Southern or East Asia, the reality of the countries that we're looking at there and the level of GDP in these countries is so much higher than what you see in Africa. So, for example, one of the statistics that may interest the audience is that there are 2 countries in Africa with annual GDP of less than $1 billion a year. One, an island nation, GDP of about $330 million. $330 million. And so just try and put that into perspective. This hotel and the business it probably does is in excess of the GDP of that island nation. Another country, GDP of less than $1 billion annually, about $990 million, and no real private sector to speak of. So when you look at the poorest countries of the world, 21 of them in the African continent, 12 either in fragility or on basically just on the outskirts of basically being called fragile. When you don't have a private sector to speak of, then to Zamir's point, there is nothing you can really do in terms of the public-private partnership space, and these governments are completely dependent on foreign aid, in many instances on sovereign support, and all of them running considerable deficits in their budgets. Africa is also home to the 10,000 the poorest communities on the continent. And so statistically speaking, now that we know and have mapped out extreme poverty, those 10,000 communities where extreme poverty is across the continent always have the same challenges in common. There's no electricity to speak of. These are communities not connected to the electrical grid. They basically need off-grid electrical solutions. They basically don't have potable water. The quality of life of Africans in these 10,000 communities is basically on the lowest spectrum all over the world. So when we basically look at ability to pay of these communities, nothing works, because the simple driver that the private sector looks for is just some kind of return. So when the concept of the Millennium Villages was tried and then it failed, you ran into the reality of, well, the ability to pay becomes the biggest challenge that many of these communities face. So what you're really trying to do is take the conceptual that's out there. So for example, in the world that I live in, when I hear GDP bonds, it lacks context, because it does not give me a vehicle for me to achieve what needs to be achieved. So we're looking for not just a vehicle for finding a way of funding the off-grid solutions that we need in the field of energy or potable water solutions. What we're really trying to do is create wealth. And wealth is going to be the only way around which any of these types of financing, and all of the types of financing, as Zamir was talking about, whether it be Islamic financing or other, these are just tools. But these tools only work, and the private sector will only work in those places, in those countries, in those communities where people have an ability to pay and where a return can actually be generated. And if we're looking for an answer as to how to achieve this and how to deal with extreme poverty, it's going to have to be using those tools to create wealth, to allow these communities to finally come out of the pattern of extreme poverty that has defined them for as far as we can go back in the history of some of these landlocked, fragile states. Thank you.
Now, again, I think keeping the same thread of discussion of public and private, I understand that, coming back to Dr. Walid, that IDB has quite a handsome portfolio, including PPP transactions, and I understand they're performing quite well. Could you share with us that how the PPP has worked out as part of the MDB portfolio, and what is your experience and what is the scope going forward?
Thank you very much. I agree. I mean, since I always speak after the World Bank and the African Development Bank, and I already described how similar we are as a multilateral development bank, so trying not to repeat what my colleagues have said. I mean, but just to give you the broader, because I worked for a few years on this Global Infrastructure Forum, which was a platform really where you can compare the performance of MDBs. So on the PPP, I think it's very clear picture again. I mean, in IDB, we have about $3.5 billion of PPP investment in our balance sheet. This is less than 20% of our infrastructure finance. Of course, I don't know how much it is in African Development Bank, but it's increasing. They have a strong department dedicated for private sector, so is Asian Development Bank, for example. Obviously, the World Bank have an entire institution, which is IFC. But I don't think MDBs are doing enough to in PPP, in the risk sharing, just like we mentioned between public and private, because this is the essential ingredients to attract private capital or private investors. I mean, investors are not going to come and invest, as I said, in a road or in a power plant if it's not viable, if it's not generating enough cash flow. We did the study as the MDBs, and we tried to measure, again, under the pressure by the G20, because they wanted to tell us, ask us, how much private capital are you catalyzing? And they keep saying about MDBs should be a catalyzer of funds, not only providers of funds, because our balance sheet is so small, and there are so many limits, prudential limits on our balance sheet. So they said, start reporting to us, how much are you catalyzing? And let me just share with you the figures of 2016, which was the first year of the I think at that year, the total infrastructure financing by all the MDBs were around 75 billion. So on top of that, we were able to, as MDBs, to catalyze 49.9 billion, that's 50 billion, in long-term direct private investment, and 114 billion in long-term indirect investment. And there was about 4 billion short-term direct investment, and that's clear because most MDBs, they don't get involved in short-term. IDB actually, probably most of this figure is coming from IDB group, because we have trade finance, and some MDBs finance SMEs and working capital and so on. So if you look at our figure, ours was about 10 billion, which is about 7% of the total. So that's a fair number. It reflects an average performance in the MDBs. But as I said, I think we need to do more on that, and there are many, a host of obstacles for why MDBs and IDB are not doing more in PPP. There is both constraints on the supply and the demand side. Bankability of projects, for example, is a key constraint, enabling environment in some countries. I think you probably, those who are working in the MENA region, they know about the electricity crisis in Lebanon, for example. It's not a rocket science to find out what are the major impediments for investment in electricity in Lebanon. And finally, with the help of the World Bank and other MDBs, we are going on on Friday for an investment conference on this issue and hosted by France, which is focused on reform, because everyone realized collectively that unless you do certain reforms in specific sectors, you're not going to attract any investment. So that's the first sort of gap. The other one is the long-term versus short-term. I mean, it's all MDBs involved in equity financing as IDB. We have an exit policy. We go to investment in equity to add value, to bring some strategic perspective, and we exit after a few years. When it comes to debt financing, we go for the long haul. We invest funds, and they sit on our balance sheet for 20 years. I think some colleague mentioned already the idea of covering the financing in the construction initial period with our preferred creditor status and other risk mitigation instruments and insurance can be a big value added to this. And then we can offload or securitize these into an asset class that more risk-averse institutional investors can come in. So these are some of the examples that MDBs can do more. Some of us, of course, are doing. But unless we change the internal incentive system in MDBs, we're going to continue to do business as usual. I mean, some MDBs are leaders or heads of MDBs are talking more explicitly on this. For example, the World Bank is now talking about maximizing financing through, for development, where they say we should first try private financing or PPP before we get and we lock our capital on this, because this is how you catalyze resources, long-term resources for sectors. Our president is now have this as very high on his agenda, and he keeps challenging us to bring more private investment, especially to infrastructure. At the end of the day, we know that development needs of our countries will not be totally met by private sector catalyzation. There will be the sectors, the social sectors that will still require public investment, public sector investment, and those we can use our precious resources for those kind of financing.
Thank you so much. I guess now let me come back to Dr. Bilal and get a more local flavor. Please, could you share with us what is Tunis doing in terms of bringing this public and private partners together, and what role stock exchanges could play in that?
Yeah. Tunis stock exchange market is very small and less diversified. Today we have only 81 listed companies with a market capitalization of about 10 billion US dollar, and it represents only 23% of our GDP. It's a very small market. The financial sector represents 50% of our market cap, and our capital market contribute only to 10% in the financement of the economy. In the other hand, I spoke later about the structure of our economy. It's 97% of our companies are SMEs, financed by the private equity and the financial market only for less than 4%. Our SMEs are undercapitalized and they don't have enough guarantees. That's why they present a huge potential for the capital market, and that's why we decide to build the program for the 120 SMEs with the UK government. For sovereign sector, infrastructure projects are generally regarded as including capital intensive facilities in the following sectors: electric power, energy, telco, water, transportation. Traditionally, in Tunisia, the public sector infrastructure projects may be financed through domestic financial market by issuing treasury bonds, mobilized by treasury dealers, by a national issue of bonds through the market, or in non-domestic markets. Tunisia, to prepare those issuing things, Tunisia put steps to mobilize fund using the market-based mechanism. 3 reforms to arouse bigger participation of the private sector in the various development projects, to allow the government to cover its needs regarding infrastructure and more widely to contribute to the implementation of an effective public service. The first one, July 2013, legal framework for issuing Islamic sukuk. in November 2015, the Public-Private Partnership Law, and in April 2017, New Investment Law. And then we identify three impediments to develop sukuk industry. That's why since 2013 we don't have our first sukuk issues. The first one is legal constraints. The second one, misunderstanding of sukuk mechanism by political parties. And the third one, the difficulty to identify the pool of assets on which the issues of sukuk can based on. To prepare our professionals to get more understanding for sukuks, we've introduced a module of Islamic finance in our education program. To develop new skills with the CISI certifications, and now our Minister of Finance are trying to prepare the first issuing sukuks.
But I think the real next thing is that how do we go where we want to go? So I think I would like to pose a question same question to each of our panel members and get their views on it. I think my question would be that what do countries need to do to attract a system, Islamic finance or risk-sharing, asset-based finance in their countries, but give me the perspective from a developed countries perspective, emerging markets, and the underdeveloped countries, because they have a different set of issues. So just share with us your thoughts on what needs to be done to maybe leverage Islamic finance in different countries. And here I do want to bring this thing that recently, about 3 weeks ago, IDB had a major event in UK, which was attended by their top political leadership, and UK gave a very good endorsement on promoting Islamic finance and making London as their financial center. So certainly there is an interest in the developed markets to further promote or develop Islamic finance. So in this last question, I think I would give Dr. Waleed first, so he would not complain anymore. So we'll give IDB the first chance, and we'll go from this side. So you go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think countries need to do what is probably general knowledge about attracting investment to their countries, the broad investment climate. As I said, there are investment fundamentals that apply across the board, whether the financing or the source of financing is Islamic or conventional. So, for example, we just heard that some countries are passing PPP laws that will provide safe investment environment for long-term investors. And I think IDB is playing part of that role. And on the regulatory and the Islamic infrastructure role, I think countries also, I understand sometimes, maybe this is for MDBs, I understand the need for standardization and harmonization of standards, but sometimes countries get constrained by their own internal issues around the regulation. And I think there is a lot of room to learn from other regions. And of course, we have jurisdictions, as they refer to them. And I think Islamic finance practitioners need to hire more engineers to do maybe financial engineering to certain issues, to go around it and not just focus on the rigidities that some jurisdictions bring. So it's really a political will that countries believe that they should open their door for investment, especially accessing Islamic capital market, and they need to believe that this brings value to their development agenda. Thank you.
So I think actually there are many challenges which are similar for Islamic finance and for conventional finance. And before I go into more detail, let me say, so I've been kind of following Islamic finance mostly as an outsider for the past 10 years, and I've come more and more to the conviction that there is an overlap And there are some, with all respect to the uniqueness, of course, of the concepts in Islamic finance, there's also some important parallels around the world to Sharia-compliant finance, to call it this way. And I guess in the Western world, I would refer to the so-called triple bottom line finance. So looking beyond pure short-term profit maximizing to environmental, social, and maybe also governance goals, which also become more and more important in the very kind of unreligious European world or the American world, I would argue. So it's not just. So I think there's a much broader. I think it's part of a much broader movement towards more conscious finance, which I think has been also accelerated, of course, by the experience of the global financial crisis. Now, having said this, coming back to the challenges. So I've done, actually I want to take an example from a very different region, and actually from a different IDB, which is the IADB, the Inter-American Development Bank, for which I recently did some work in Latin America on long-term finance, and not looking at specific institution, but more kind of the bird's eye view. And just to give you the equivalent, and I think these might be also challenges relevant for this context and for this region. So you have on the one hand a small low-income country with one pension fund, or with one major pension fund, where all the salaried workers, at least those in formal jobs, actually contributing. But there is what I would call the reverse maturity transformation. Long-term claims being transformed into short-term assets in the form of bank deposits. No investment into bonds, equity, private equity and infrastructure and so on. And why? Number one, no regulatory framework. Number two, no incentive structure, no corporate governance structure within the pension fund. I mean, just to give you one very concrete example, one of the pension fund managers, or the CEO, actually told me, well, his tenure is 5 years. He would never invest for more than his tenure. Why? Because as soon as he leaves office and the next guy doesn't like what he did, he's going to sue him in court. So I think that's kind of shows you the very kind of principle, basic institutional problems, contractual problems that sometimes are being faced. But then even if we go to another country, kind of a poster child in the middle income countries for pension reforms, Chile, even there, not everything is perfect. Even there are incentive problems. Why? Because the benchmark on which pension fund managers are being assessed is an annual one, which again, of course, biases towards short-term maximization, return maximization, rather than to this long-term horizon that would be necessary. Let me give you one last example, and actually that's another example from another Latin American countries. On the demand side, since I mentioned earlier, the demand side is as important. You mentioned, I think Michael mentioned earlier his mother, and certainly I'm getting to an age where I also wouldn't like to bet my pension, not bet, so I invest my pension purely in equity. But of course, you give people a choice, and there is, of course, as we know, there might be default choices, and we know that if there's a default, large part of the people might not deviate from this choice until they're being kind of pushed, they're being nudged to actually do so. Now, where do you put people into the default option in pension funds? Do you put them in the middle of the road, even if they're 20 years old? Or, which will then lead, in the case that I just quoted, to the fact that only 0.1% of all pension fund participants choose the risky profile, even if they're 20 or 25 years old? Or do you choose a default option, which actually is according to the age? So the younger ones would actually go for the risky profile. They can, of course, opt out if they don't feel like doing it, if they have some kind of Germanic background for it, maybe. But anyway, so that I think there is a lot of also on the behavioral side, and I think these challenges, I would argue, are not just in conventional finance. I think they are actually kind of global in this context. Thanks.
Sovereign vehicle. So we are creating a new forum called the Africa Investment Forum, for which the Islamic Development Bank, the IFC, have kindly agreed to participate and to support. And the Africa Investment Forum in November is effectively trying to bring to the continent the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, to look at the bankable projects that are actually available on the continent, to present de-risking options, to promote a variety of different tools, among them public-private partnerships, where we can leverage the private sector on the ground, leverage foreign direct investment, leverage the sovereign wealth funds, leverage the pension funds, with a commitment towards creating profit scenarios, but at the same time working towards promoting, further advancing the SDGs. Along that vein, whatever tools we actually use, de-risking is going to be the key issue. And of course, Islamic finance and de-risking principles are actually a very good match. They go hand in hand. The profit and loss sharing principles, the asset backing principles are really very conducive to the concept of de-risking. And so what we're really trying to do in the Africa Investment Forum is create a variety of de-risking tools, to use those de-risking tools to make sure that the money that we need for the continent, for Africa specifically, as I said, through sovereign wealth funds, through pension funds, is somehow married to bankable projects on the continent to allow us to achieve the SDGs for the continent in a forum that can actually promote more private sector investment in Africa and at the same time promote wealth. Thank you.
Thank you. For me, I'd like to underline two main points. The first one is legal framework, regulation, Sharia compliant, and now we are working on this in Tunisia. The second one is how to convince politics and unions to use state-owned companies as a potential to attract Islamic finance. And I think we have a lot of good companies. We can capture this kind of financement by getting those companies listed in the market.
Thanks. I think I would just, final point would be to echo what Professor Beck was saying. I think there is a very important multiplier effect if Islamic investors are combined with conventional ESG investors, environmental, social, and governance motivated investors. I mean, I mentioned the IFM Sukuk earlier, the vaccination Sukuk. That was sold, obviously, the Sukuk to Islamic investors. We also issue conventional bonds for IFM that are sold largely to impact investors, including the Sovereign Wealth Fund, or the equivalent of a Sovereign Wealth Fund for the Mormon Church, the Vatican Treasury, the Church of Scotland have all bought IFM conventional bonds. So if we can put these two investor bases closer together, you really have much more significant scale of the capital that can be deployed, and I think that is a useful way to look into the future about the scale of what Islamic finance can do in countries where it may not be the predominant form of finance.
Thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate that. I think we have some time to open the floor for question and answers. I would appreciate if you could limit your your comments to short comments, and please feel free to ask questions to any of our panel members. So, any questions from the floor? Or our panelists have addressed pretty much everything. Sorry? Yes, please. Please identify yourself and then introduce yourself. Thank you. Wa alaikum salam. Yeah, please. But I think the issue is the translators. They cannot hear you. That's the problem. Could we go this? But see, this could discourage people from asking questions. So we do want questions from the floor and comments, your own experience.
Ahmed Mustafa bin Tube. I work for Bank of Industry in Nigeria. And prior to that, I was involved in setting up the first Islamic bank, Jais Bank in Nigeria. Sorry. My concern or question is how do you differentiate Islamic finance, product differentiation, in terms of even how the products are structured and also the cost. You know, quite a number of the panelists make issues about high cost of scoop, etc., etc. Those of us in new markets where Islamic finance, there's a lot of resistance to go into it, including the Muslims. They said, look, what you are selling to us is all wine in a new bottle. It's the same interest base that you are trying to bring in another way around. So I think I will call on IDB and other stakeholders like the Islamic Finance Service Board, etc., to see how we can really bring down the cost of Islamic finance, at least on the ethical ground where we can say it's not as exploitative as the interest rate. Thank you very much.
Very valid point. I think I'll ask first Dr. Waleed because I think he is more involved with this thing. And then probably if Michael can explain the pricing on his scoop, because my understanding is the pricing are quite converging, but maybe, or anyone else?
I think it's an issue probably of a scale. Obviously, I mean, if you ask Dr. Zamir, who's been now more recently involved in issuing sukuk for IDB, the pricing is converging and towards a comparable level with other issuers, as a AAA issuer at least. I think it's the final cost. It's really a weighted average of the cost. I think if we blend equity and debt finance, and I understand from a consumer maybe point of view, if you look at the debt instrument that Islamic banks use, it looks very similar to the conventional banks. So if you only compare in terms of price, it might look even exploitative. I mean, just because you're saying certain people in certain communities, they expect Islamic finance to be more social oriented and perhaps even less costly, which is not the case. But that's probably more on the individual or retail banking. But on the products, yes, I mean, we use very similar sale-based products. For example, when we finance infrastructure, we use installment sale or leasing or istisna for civil works and contracts, for example. And they have, they rely on the cost of mobilization that our treasury is able to achieve. And that's back to the issue of scale and appetite in the capital market.
Michael, would you like to add something based on your experience of sukuk issuance?
Probably, it's certainly true that transaction costs were higher because we were doing something new compared to a conventional bond. Maybe we paid an additional 3 basis points in transaction costs for a 500 million issue, but the pricing was lower. We probably saved 5 basis points in terms of the pricing because we were providing a new product that had a lot of demand among Islamic investors. So net, we won. It was cheaper for us to do a sukuk. Of course, we had to bear the 3 basis points transaction costs before we knew we were going to get the good pricing. So there is an issue there that you have to have faith that your pricing will work out. But definitely in our case, on a net basis, we actually save money by issuing an Islamic form.
Thank you. Any other comments from any? Okay. Any other comment or question from the floor? I hope the mic. Yes, please. Could we get a mic to? Please introduce yourself and state the question. Walaikum salam. I cannot. Yes, please. I think you may have to get some exercise and come over. which number is for the French?
Salam alaikum. Je m'appelle Amadou Abdoulaye Diallo. Je suis le directeur général du Fonds de solidarité africain. Le Fonds de solidarité africain est un fonds de garantie qui apporte la garantie financière aux banques et aux établissements financiers qui accordent des concours bancaires aux PME. Et j'opère dans 14 pays et les statistiques des PME sont comparables aux statistiques des PME en Tunisie. À peu près 93% des entreprises sont des PME, mais qui ont des difficultés d'accès au financement par défaut de fourniture de garantie. Et donc nous sommes chargés par nos États membres d'apporter cette garantie financière. Ma question est la suivante. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire au niveau de la finance islamique pour aider une institution de garantie comme le Fonds de solidarité africain à accroître son concours en faveur des PME des 14 États membres dans lesquels il opère? Évidemment, cela signifie qu'au niveau de la Banque islamique de développement et au niveau de toutes les institutions qui sont impliquées dans le développement de la finance islamique, de quitter sa zone de confort, explorer de nouveaux champs opérationnels. Et j'aimerais bien voir dans cette perspective ce qu'il est possible de faire comme appui à une structure comme le Fonds de solidarité africain. Je vous remercie.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I cannot hear the translation. Could someone translate, or one of the panel members, and maybe address the question?
A credit guarantee fund in the Central and Western African region to support SME finance, and he's inquiring about how Islamic finance can support these guarantee funds to expand further SME finance in the region.
Okay.
So I'm not going to...
Sure. I think Dr. Waleed probably could address that. Well, I mean, I guess... I mean, we have a, again, I only thing I can say that, you know, we have quite a presence in the, in Africa, and SME is certainly on our agenda. Here, however, I would like to mention this thing, that, you know, the IDB mostly deals with the public sector, whereas we have a private sector arm, which is ICD, which is Islamic Cooperation for Development, and they have a more, I mean, I would say dedicated mandate to deal with SME. I would suggest that the person who made a comment on the question, they should get in touch with ICD, who can give you a better idea of in what way the ICD could help. Same time, I would also like to bring this attention to your attention that IDB Group has another entity called ITFC, which deals with the trade finance, and they may be able to, idea is to promote the trade, and especially on the SME sector, and they may be able to help as well.
If I just add, Dr. Zamir mentioned, left one important institution, it's called Islamic Corporation for Investment of Credit and Export Insurance. And tomorrow there is a whole day, it's called IDB Group Private Sector Forum, which is a regular activity of the IDB annual meeting. And all these entities will get together and they have a very rich program. So I invite anybody who's interested in the private sector products of the IDB to attend that meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Waleed. Now I think one last question from the gentleman in the front. I think it's better that you come and all.
Good morning, everybody. vais continuer en français, please, après nos amis africains. Comme ça, on donne un petit peu plus de chance pour les Tunisiens et surtout les Africains. Je me présente, c'est Mahfoud Barouni, je suis banquier, j'étais dans le groupe El Baraka dès le départ, puis j'ai fondé, je suis le premier directeur général de Banque Zitouna, et je suis actuellement dans le private equity. Juste pour continuer avec la question de notre ami africain, une des institutions aussi de la BID, je réponds peut-être à la place, il y a l'ISEC, l'institution des assurances, de garantie des financements, des investissements et de l'export. C'est la filiale, je pense, tout à fait indiquée pour votre démarche, parce que c'est, lorsqu'on parle de fonds de garantie, donc c'est le système des assurances, investissement ou assurance export. Pour revenir à la question du financement de l'investissement, surtout les investissements publics, je voudrais poser une proposition qui doit être très intéressante. La question principale pour des pays qui sont à majorité SMEs, petites et moyennes entreprises, c'est un problème de size, de taille de l'investissement. Et la solution, elle existe. J'invite un petit peu les institutions internationales, publiques, World Bank, BAD, IDB, tout ça, à peut-être être des initiateurs de fonds souverains, de grands fonds de fonds. Et avec des gros tickets, parce que les marchés, que ce soit tunisiens ou autres, marocains ou africains, ne peuvent pas directement investir ou, disons, trouver des deals d'une taille assez grande. Donc, ce fonds de fonds serait le vis-à-vis des petits fonds sectoriels ou régionaux au niveau des pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, peut-être ici en Tunisie et en Afrique du Nord. C'est des fonds régionaux ou des fonds sectoriaux. Et avec ces fonds-là, ce sont ces fonds-là qui seront peut-être apporteront leur aide, bien sûr en jouant le seed investor, ça veut dire qu'il faut qu'il soit à l'origine. Ma proposition pour la Tunisie, par exemple, la CDC, la Caisse des dépôts et consignations, serait le vis-à-vis public tunisien ici pour de tels fonds. Et bien sûr, on peut émettre des fonds d'investissement avec toute la législation et toute la série de textes innovantes pour la Tunisie depuis 2011, mais qu'il faut mettre en place et surtout actionner. Donc, je pense que entre les deux niveaux de dimension, de size en anglais, il faut trouver un moyen et un link entre le public sector et le private sector, et surtout pour encourager le PPP, le partenariat public-privé. Et je pense que ce serait une très bonne chose. Et là, j'invite l'IDB, puisque je suis dans la famille de la finance islamique. L'IDB serait vraiment agréable d'être le leader dans ce domaine. Merci.
Thank you so much. Could I get some help in? Okay. I mean, I think it was a comment. Is there any panel member would like to address that, or what?
Maybe since the speaker mentioned sovereign wealth funds, I just maybe take this opportunity to also inform you that the IDB organizes an annual forum for sovereign wealth funds from the member countries. And the next one is going to be held in the first week of May in Gabon. They will be hosted by Gabon. So that will, of course, will be more focused on the issues of the potential role of sovereign wealth funds in financing development in member countries.
Thank you. Yes, Prospect.
To a very important issue, which I think maybe hasn't come enough out yet, which is the size issue. I mean, especially on this continent, if I may talk about the whole African continent with 54 countries, there is just a scale issue, especially for many of the foreign investors. So looking beyond South Africa, Nigeria, and maybe Kenya, or Egypt, then it's getting difficult for many of them. So having kind of a structure where you have a fond de fond, like a larger fund, including kind of these private and public partnerships, I think can be a very important mechanism to bring in more capital, both from the domestic side and from the international side. Of course, as always, the devil is in the detail, especially on the governance side. Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I think I must give credit to our panelists that they have kept our audience very much engaged, and I'm very pleased that towards the end of the session we still have a full audience. So please join me in thanking our panel members for their expert views. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank all the panelists, and I would like to remind you that this afternoon, starting from 1 o'clock, we will have two sessions related to the role of digital technologies in sustainable development. Thank you very much.